This episode of The History Guy is brought to you by Policy Genius. The term "you've struck oil" might mean that you have found success or good luck or even instant wealth. The term likely arose in the United States in the middle part of the 19th century, but it really came into its own in the early part of the 20th century when various oil booms meant that literally striking oil could make a man rich in a matter of moments. But of all those strikes, one outgushed them all. One strike so spectacular that the gushing oil literally became a tourist attraction. The granddaddy of gushers, the Lakeview Gusher, was called in its time the mecca of the oilfields and the greatest oil well in the world. I'm the history guy, but I'm also a dad. My daughter Willow's almost 18, and she's a senior this year. It's amazing how time flies. She's a straight A student. She's great. I love spending time with her. I walk her to the bus every morning, like we have since kindergarten, because that way we get a chat to start our day. But she does give me reason, being a historian and spends his time thinking about history, to think about the future, and maybe even the future where I'm history. Because the thing is, if you have people who depend upon you, you just have to have life insurance. It's that simple. You can't leave them in a lurch. So the first thing you learn when you study history is that stuff comes along that you would never expect. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide for your family with a financial safety net starting today. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid those unnecessary medical exams. Look, I know you don't expect the history guy to be selling insurance. And, the thing is, I'm not. And Policy Genius isn't either. They're not an insurance company. They're an online marketplace that helps you choose the best insurance for you. And because of that, you know that they're going to serve your best interests and help you make the right choices. But I want to be honest here. I really appreciate my sponsors. Policy Genius sponsoring this episode helps me to keep making episodes of the history guy. So if you like history, then please, pay attention to my sponsors. They're great. But not only that, but for all I talk about history, I figure if I help some of you prepare for the future, well, that's good work. So just go check out Policy Genius. Look, they answer your questions for you. They do the paperwork for you. They help you choose the insurance policy that's best for you. They're not pirates. So think of history, but prepare for the future. Go to policygenius.com/thehistoryguy. That's policygenius.com/thehistoryguy, or click the link in the description. See how much money you could save. The human use of petroleum long predates the internal combustion engine. In fact, natural seeps were apparently being used before human civilization rose, primarily for waterproofing. Petroleum might have been used for energy, for heat and light, by the 7th century in China, and even to make roads long before the advent of cars. But the primary use was still waterproofing, just as it had been with prehistoric ancestors. Sometime in the 16th century, sailors became commonly called jack-tars, referring to the use of oil pitch to waterproof ships, leaving sailors covered with tar. It wasn't until the 18th century that crude oil started to be refined into purer forms and used for lamps and then stoves. The use of refined petroleum for gas lighting became common starting in the middle 19th century, and some other products like benzene used as a household solvent. When Carl Benz's wife Bertha took her husband's invention on a 60-mile round trip, perhaps the world's first road trip, in 1888, she ran out of fuel and so famously purchased benzene at a local pharmacy. But with cars still a novelty, the use of petroleum in the last decades of the 19th century was for lighting. Ironically, this had a huge environmental impact, as the replacement of whale oil for less expensively produced petroleum products likely saved world whale populations from extinction. The existence of petroleum on the sunny west coast of North America was well recognized by native populations, who used the petroleum from the natural oil seep in La Brea as a natural lubricant and as a sealant for their canoes. Following the discovery of gold in 1849, the state had seen an enormous population growth. The Anglo population of the state was less than 100,000 in 1850, but by 1900 it was almost 1.5 million, and just 10 years later the population had grown by another million. This huge growth had created a huge demand for petroleum. They were certainly automobiles. The Los Angeles Almanac reckons that there were 1,600 motor vehicles in Los Angeles in 1904. And the more pressing need, though, was for lighting, although railroad locomotives were already switching from coal to oil at the time as well. But along with the demand, there was supply. The turn of the century represented an oil boom in California. By 1903, California was the #1 oil-producing state in the nation. Despite what might be popular perception, the LA Times wrote in 2021 that the oil industry was as important to the population growth in Southern California in the first half of the 20th century as the film industry. A June 22, 1910 edition of the San Francisco Examiner reports a contract with the Mexican government for 10 million barrels of California petroleum, something made possible because, the Examiner writes, the production of oil for the state in May is above even the highest advanced estimates. Still, the Examiner also makes an interesting note. Despite increased production numbers, they report, but for the great Lakeview Gusher, the state would be facing a shortage. One well that was the difference between surplus and shortage? The San Joaquin Geological Society noted in 2002 that the San Joaquin Valley, the southern end of the state's Central Valley, had been the location of significant oil finds, including Klondike Oil Company's Shamrock Gusher, which came in at 1,300 barrels a day in 1896 and was considered the first major oil strike in the state, and the 1909 Chancellor Canfield Midway Gusher, flowing at about 2,000 barrels per day. But that doesn't mean that oil was easy to find. You still had to, rather literally, strike oil. And one person, who a 2010 edition of the Los Angeles Times described as a mysterious old-timer, had an idea how to do that. He was, the paper reports, fond of telling anyone who would listen that reddish grass meant oil below, something about the sunburned seed pods and moisture and the presence of underground faults. The idea was mostly ignored, except for by a one-time grocer named Julius Fried. The Chatsworth California Historical Society explains that Fried was born in Healdsburg, Sonoma, the son of a 49er pioneer. He went to the Coalinga, California oilfields in 1901, left after 4 years, and pursued other oil opportunities. Sometime in 1909, he followed the mysterious old-timer's advice and, with some partners, purchased a patch of ground with reddish grass in Kern County and founded the Lakeview Oil Company. The land was some 30 miles south of Bakersfield, and the lake was Buena Vista Lake. The Fresno Morning Republican wrote in 1910, they had limited means to sink into the venture, but they were in the midst of the great Sunset Field, in territory that was pretty sure to be good, or so it seemed. But at first it didn't look so good. The LA Times writes that the first several months of drilling below the reddish stalks, however, yielded nothing but brown earth, yellow clay, and gray sand. The Morning Republican wrote that they worked with their own money. The drill went down 1,600 feet, and still it was not in the pay sand. Figuring on the formation whereabouts, it seemed that the well should be near the depth where the oil should flow. But the investors had nearly run out of money. The Morning Republican continues, at an extremity financially, these men then got the Union Oil Company to come in for 51% of the stock. The Times writes that Los Angeles-based Union Oil, now part of Unocal Corp., bought a controlling interest in the company, but mainly because it wanted to use the area for storage containers. But the company kept drilling. The website Amusing Planet writes, for 14 months the company drilled, but fortune still eluded them. The Union Company decided they didn't want to sink any more time and money into what looked to be a dry hole, so the Union assigned Dry Hole Charlie Woods, a driller with a notorious track record with dusters, to the well. Charlie was not a bad driller, but he was always assigned to drill poor prospects. The Morning Republican writes that the Union carried the well down to 2,100 feet. The venture was near failure, as seemed possible. It was commonly understood that the men were on their uppers, and the stock could be had for a song. The end seemed to come on Monday, March 14th, when the San Francisco Call-and-Post wrote the drill of the Lakeview well was pounding methodically through a sandy formation more than 2,100 feet below the surface, and gradually the sands hardened and the signs of approaching water appeared. Prompt orders were given to cease drilling. But the crew didn't stop. The Call-and-Post noted, but once again it is the story of the man who dared to disobey. The Morning Republican says that the workers were anxious to get an extra day's wages, although the LA Times wrote at the time that it was optimistic men who kept on in disobedience of orders. The Call-and-Post reported, the next day the big drill was hoisted and sent down for another exploration. There was a crack, as of breaking of bones, and the long cylinder slid into the soft ooze. A rush of gas sent a warning hiss up the tube, and in a few moments there was a rumble, and then an explosion. A column of black mud shot over the derrick and splashed over the boiler house. The Morning Republican wrote, "The tools came out of the well. There was another explosion, and with it a glut of tarry mud and refuse. More explosions followed, tossing the rocks and sandy refuse into the air. Then with a rush came the free petroleum, higher above the derrick. In 2 days the crown block went, and sprays from the geyser rose 1,000 feet in the air. The Lakeview #1 was a fact, and has since been the marvel of the oil world." Dry Hole Charlie's luck had changed. The San Joaquin Geological Society writes, "On coming to work that morning, Charlie solemnly commented that Lakeview must have cut an artery of the Earth's great central storehouse of oil, whereas all previous wells have been merely pinpricks in the Earth's thick hide. Sometimes underground reservoirs of oil are under high pressure, and once drilled, the oil sprays up, releasing the pressure, and those are called gushers, and usually the pressure only lasts a short time. But not so for the Lakeview Gusher. In fact, Dry Hole Charlie Woods had a problem on his hands." Amusing Planet writes, "The drillers were excited at the sudden windfall of fortune, but soon it became apparent that the well wasn't going to stop anytime soon. In the initial days, the flow was estimated at around 125,000 barrels a day. But even after 30 days, the flow was still 90,000 barrels a day. The torrents of oil pouring out of the well created a river of crude oil that threatened to flow downhill towards Buena Vista Lake, 8 miles away. The LA Times writes, "What we feared was an early rain," recalled Charles Dry Hole Woods, confronted with too much of a good thing. "A flash flood could have spread our ocean of oil down over the valley below. So we went up into the hills with an army of 600 men and dammed up the mouths of the canyon with earth walls 20 feet high and 50 feet thick." The San Joaquin Valley Geological Association explains that although the wooden derrick remained standing a few weeks longer, eventually it too, and all of the drilling equipment as well, were completely swallowed up by a huge crater that formed around the drill well. Even as they struggled to control the flow of oil, the impact was immediate. The Morning Republican noted that the promoter who had the tenacity to stay with the unpromising hole are on easy street indeed. The Chatsworth Historical Society writes, "In 1910, at the age of 37, Julius hit the largest oil strike in U.S. history, 30 miles southeast of Bakersfield. Julius became instantly wealthy, married 22-year-old Dorothy Dot Kramer 7 months later, and took up residence in Santa Monica and then Los Angeles." The Morning Republican noted that it wasn't just Fried who benefited. "This well has caused more speculation, more comment, more sensational business propositions than everything else in the oil business in the same time rolled together. Land values near the well rushed skyward, just as the oil was doing." The Times noted that the ensuing surplus dropped the price of oil by about half, to 30 cents a barrel. Meanwhile, the attempt to corral the oil became an ongoing battle. The Geological Society writes that torrents of oil poured from the wild well, and hundreds of men worked round the clock building sandbag dams to contain the crude in 20 large open-air sumps. The flow continued unabated, and 30 days after the well first blew in, the flow was estimated at 90,000 barrels a day. The Lakeview #1 quickly became America's most famous gusher. The Column Post reported that the great stream had passed far beyond the stages of control. Night and day, an army of men had been at work endeavoring to cap it and building large storage dams to accommodate the flow. Dressed in rubber from hat to boot, with glass lookouts for the eyes, the employees of the lease have struggled valiantly to curb the flow. They labor amid a rain of oil. The Geological Society writes, "A 4-inch pipeline leading to 8 55,000-barrel tanks about 2.5 miles away was installed in the amazingly short time of 4 hours. From the tanks, an 8-inch line carried the oil to Porto Vila on the California coast. And yet, the Column Post write, it has filled the pipelines, and still as much runs to reservoirs as a ravine the size of an irrigating ditch and several pipes can carry. The men employed are being paid extra wages, and a special offer has been made of $5,000 to the man who can cap the geyser." Guinness World Records writes, "About a month after the initial blowout, a wooden box about the size of a house and made from 14 by 14-inch timbers was moved over the well in an attempt to control the flow. This was soon smashed apart. The well was so famous that it became a tourist attraction." The Morning Republican wrote that every visitor who lands in Maricopa within a short time takes a road leading northward through an avenue of derricks, and return betimes spattered with oil. This is a sign that he has visited the mecca of the oil fields, the Lakeview Gusher. The Colin Post reported the spectators marveled at the wonder, but the sight was more than grand at night. The hot rocks at times caused the gusher to look like a huge 4th of July flower pot, sending its bright lines of fire high into the heavens. Agnes Hart, a docent at the West Kern Oil Museum in Taft, California, told National Public Radio in 2010, "They ran one train every day just for tourists. The only trouble was that if the wind happened to be blowing towards the train, it would blow the oil because oil is very light. And if the wind happened to be blowing towards the train was covered in oil and you couldn't see through the windows. And if you stepped out of the train, then you got covered in oil." There were problems. The Times write that some folks saw the gusher as a sign of disapproval from the Almighty. Hadn't one preacher in Pennsylvania warned drillers that the oil was meant to remain in the earth to kindle the fires of hell? Union Oil ended up spending the huge sum at the time of $350,000 to build pipelines. And there were lawsuits and concerns that the well would start fires on nearby land or pollute Buena Vista Lake, which was used for irrigation. 2, Union suffered itself because of the drop in the price of oil. Eventually, Guinness explained, in October 1910, workers succeeded in building an enormous circular dam around the well, and the weight of the oil contained in this pond reduced it from a towering gusher to a bubbling spring. But bubble it still did. The well continued to produce until September of 1911, when the bottom of the well collapsed as the underground pressure dropped and the flow stopped. In its 544 days, it had produced a staggering 9 million barrels, some 1,372,000 tons of oil. There were efforts to reopen the well, but the Geological Society notes Lakeview No. 1 never again flowed more than 30 barrels a day and was finally abandoned. The reservoir had been drained. But the Lakeview Gusher had been, they opine, the greatest gusher California has ever known. Author William Rintoul wrote in the Encyclopedia of California Oil History, "It died as suddenly as it was born." Despite all those efforts, workers only managed to recover about 40% of the oil. Today, Guinness lists the Lakeview Gusher as the largest accidental oil spill in world history. According to the LA Times, dry hole Charlie Wood moved on and then lived up to his previous reputation, drilling only dry holes, one after another. Today, the spot that the Morning Republican once called the greatest oil well in the world is nearly forgotten. If you go there and find it, there's still some oil in the sand, as well as a marker that was placed there by the state of California. But the Times notes the terrain is almost as barren as it was 100 years ago. Even Agnes Hart, the docent at the Oil Museum, says that it's better to read about it than it is to see. Can I put you down? Will you let me? Oh, no. 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 That's it. I'm holding the cat for the rest of the day. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community and locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.